Well, hello and welcome back to another Blue Yonder video. And today I'm going to be talking about sports tourers. Now there's been a bit of a revival, hasn't there, in the sports tourer class over the last year or so. And we've seen bikes like the Suzuki GSX 1000 SGT, the Ninja 1000, which has been around a while, and of course a bike that's very close to my heart, the Moto Guzzi V100. But what I thought would be an interesting comparison is whether this, the VFR750, which is a 1996 bike, so almost 30 years old, whether this can still cut it against the new breed of sports tourers. Let's find out. Okay, so I want to talk about four areas where I think the VFR is starting to show its age against the modern bikes such as the V100. And those four areas are ergonomics, the riding position, the power and the power delivery on the road, brakes, major difference, and finally tech and safety aids. Now, because the VFR is very much traditional sports tourer, the riding position tends to mimic a little bit the sports bikes of that time, the 1990s, obviously not quite as extreme. But you've got that same sort of riding position. You lean forward, you've got a reasonable amount of weight on your wrists, and your legs are very much tucked up and behind in the sort of traditional sports bike manner. On longer, faster rides, it actually works really well. If you've seen my 300 miles on a VFR video, which I did last year, I rode 300 miles down to East Sussex from Nottinghamshire, using a mixture of motorways, A roads and B roads, and because it was a fairly high speed ride and it got the wind pressure lifting the weight off your wrists and making it a much easier ride, actually allowing the riding position to work, it actually wasn't too bad. And when I got off the bike after all that time, when I got off the bike, I wasn't actually feeling too bad. I wasn't exactly fresh as the daisy, but equally I wasn't uncomfortable either, and it did feel as though I could have carried on beyond the 300 mile point without really any major discomfort or fatigue. If we're just doing like pottering around like this at 50 miles an hour on fairly bumpy B roads, this is not really where the VFR scores. And that's one of the key differences, I think, between the traditional classic sports tourer that the VFR is and the modern sports tourers. Modern sports tourers are designed much more for rider comfort, and the ergonomics are much more upright and probably cater to, let's face it, an ageing market. The demographics of the buyers of these types of bikes, guys like myself, getting older. We've ridden the bikes in the 90s, we've had all the sports bikes, and we don't want to give up that performance completely. Let's go down here. Don't want to give up that performance completely, but at the same time we don't want lots of weight at our wrists and a bad back at the end of the ride. You want something that actually you're going to be able to get off the bike and you're feeling nice and comfortable. And as I say, this is the major difference between this, the traditional sports tourer, and the new class of bikes that are making up sports tourers now. So I've now jumped on the V100 after being on the VFR, and straight away the differences are huge. It's not as much of a stretch to the bars as it is on the VFR, surprisingly. And as you can see there, I've got a much wider stance on my arms. It's almost adventure bike like. I've got the adjustable screen, which is doing a good job of keeping the worst of the weather off me, and the front binnacle. So although the front end doesn't look as big as the VFRs, it actually does a really good job of keeping the worst of the cold and the weather off you. We sat much more upright, feel almost like I'm riding like a copper, by comparison to the VFR, which is much more traditional sports tourer. So in terms of the ergonomics, you can see where design has moved on, and actually in terms of riding experience and comfort, sports tourers have definitely evolved for the better. So this is another area really where I think the VFR has been left behind. So these sorts of low speeds and low speed turns, the VFR does feel a little bit top heavy and ponderous, and certainly not as precise and as easy to ride as the V100. And that is obviously another area where bike designers made major advances. All the bikes now, all the modern bikes, are so easy to ride. The convenience of modern bikes, over and above old bikes like this, 30-year-old models like this, is, you know, it's only when you ride them back to back that you actually see the strides that have been made. And we're all, I think, much more demanding as customers now. You know, we expect performance, but we also expect convenience as well. So in terms of convenience, well, you've got a centre stand, that's about it really. Over and above modern bikes, there's no heated grips on this particular bike. Obviously a lot of people retrofitted them as aftermarket parts. But having said that, you know, equally on modern bikes, there's not many modern bikes where heated grips come as standard. They're usually an optional extra. Being an old analog bike from the 1990s, of course there's no ABS, no traction control, no riding modes. What you see is what you get, and the bike, you have to ride the bike accordingly. So when we're on tricky roads like this where there's lots of gravel, damp patches, you've got to be extremely smooth with the throttle. And when you've got massive potholes like that, you've got to be extremely smooth with the throttle. And that's kind of an art that I think a lot of modern riders haven't really developed. You know, when you've got 100 horsepower at your rear wheel, fairly small contact patch, and you know, retaining traction is down to you and the smoothness of the use of the throttle. It actually makes the ride not just challenging, but actually makes it rewarding as well. So there's a lot to be said for having an analog bike. There's a lot more satisfaction, a lot more rider satisfaction, I think, in many cases to be had. Yes, very, very slippery today. We've had a lot of heavy rain yesterday, as you can probably see by the water in the gullies. We've had a lot of heavy rain, and there's been a lot of dirt on the road, and it's extremely greasy. But the VFR, she's quite sure-footed. You know, if you rode this bike in isolation, you never rode anything else, you'd think it was a great bike, and it is a great bike. Okay, so this road's quite a good test of handling, so let's see how the VFR handles it, shall we? Still a little bit greasy and dirty, and got a lot of temperature in the tyres. So as you saw there, she handles fast sweepers really quite well. The stability, the outright stability, isn't as good as on the V100, which is just tracks to the millimetre. It's so exceptionally good handling, very precise, stable, yet relatively quick turning, whereas the VFR, she's sort of in the middle. She's not totally stable, she's not totally quick steering, but she's alright. She's not quite in the Goldilocks zone, to quote a certain vlogger. Now, braking is another area where things have advanced tremendously in the last 30 years. So let's have a quick look at the VFR's brakes. So the VFR's brakes, we've got 296mm dual rotors, twin piston calipers on the front. On the rear, it's dual piston again, but a much smaller disc. I'll put the disc size up on the screen. Of course, this is from the era where there was no ABS, whereas the V100 is more than fully equipped. The V100, by comparison, has 320mm rasped by Brembo's radially mounted monoblock calipers. But not only that, it also has cornering ABS, which is a real safety benefit, and something that is like light years away from riding an analog bike like the VFR. Let's talk about the cockpit of the bike. As you can see, it's pretty darn basic, isn't it? You've got your big rev counter in the middle, beautifully picked out in white, looks quite classy. Your speedo up there over to the left, fuel gauge, temp gauge, clock and idiot lights at the top. For its time, actually, the dashboard was considered quite classy. The font, etc., was, you know, a really nice font, really quite stylish. You know, things like the turn indicator there, always nice and easy, clear to see. And overall, it was a good dashboard. But now we're so demanding. By contrast with a modern bike, this is extremely basic. And if you compare it directly with the V100. So straight away, if you look at the dashboard, we've got clock, which actually tells the correct time, clock, the heated grip symbol, you've got your big tacho in the middle, just like on the VFR. But unlike the VFR, we've got a digital speed readout, which is so easy to read. It's excellent. And again, a big gear indicator, which again is missing off the VFR. Which, you know, it was around. It was just a big miss, I think, by Honda at the time, because it's such an easy thing to do and such a useful thing to have. Range to empty is so useful, and again, it's something that's on all modern bikes. The information that's on the V100 reflects really what we demand now in terms of what we expect to see and demand in terms of instrumentation and display and information. We expect a lot of information available to us. We want to know what the average mile per gallon is. We want to know what the current mile per gallon is. We want to know what your maximum speed's been, for goodness sakes, and in some cases what your lead angle's been. Okay, CC wise, this is the 748cc, it's the 750 bike, gear driven cam. On a good day, the VFR is putting out about 100 brake horsepower at 10,000 revs or thereabouts. The V100, by comparison, is putting out 115 brake horsepower at 8,750. Peak torque on this bike is just about 73 newton meters at 8,000 revs, just over 8,000 revs. So the VFR has what I would say is a period feel to it. It has that period feel of 1990s bikes. It's got two distinct power kicks, one at 6,000 revs and one at 8,000 revs, whereas it's a much more linear, progressive delivery of power on the V100. So again, let's go back out on the road and see how this translates to riding in the real world. So we're in top gear, 60 miles an hour, 4,000, just over 4,000 revs, and the bike feels very easy, very comfortable. As a fast aero bike, the VFR still has a lot going for it. Now the big V-twin on the Guzzi V100, developing 115 brake horsepower, and it's developing that power 2,000 revs or so low down the rev range. The VFR creates its max power at 10,000. I think it's just over 8,000, 8,250, something like that, I believe. Maybe even less on the V100. But more importantly, the big V-twins delivering much more torque, and again 1,250 revs further down the rev range. 45% more torque than the VFR, and out on the road that really makes itself felt. So although the VFR is quick, you've got to really wind her up and rev the bike to actually get to that sort of power, whereas on the V100 it's much easier, much more accessible. Well, this is a really good test of ride quality. It's a very bumpy road, really poor surface, really deteriorated, really needs totally replacing, and the bike handles it quite well. The front is set up quite soft, I suppose. I tend to ride more on the softer setup. Similarly with the rear, it's a new rear shock, but the front is standard. I'm pretty sure that the fork springs or the standard springs haven't been changed. What I have done, I have had the forecoil replaced with a slightly heavier grade forecoil, and that's taken away that sponginess, that softness on the braking, and but it's not really affected the ride quality at all. It's not made a massive deterioration, in fact any deterioration in the quality of the ride. So in terms of ride quality, I'd say the VFR is at least a match to modern bikes. Actually, in hindsight, it's very, very good. This isn't bad, but it feels a lot firmer, a lot more jiggly than the VFR does. It still feels quite firm and, dare I say, slightly harsh in comparison to the VFR. So okay then, what can we conclude about the VFR750? Can it still cut it against the modern competition? Well, it doesn't matter really what metric you want to compare the two against. If we look at power delivery and performance, the V100 really is in a completely different league. Safety features, basically the VFR doesn't have any. Whereas modern bikes like the V100, absolutely chock full of them. The high and low speed handling on the V100 again is much better than the VFR. As I say, anything you want to really compare it against, the VFR is outclassed by the modern bike. But is that the whole story? Does that mean that the VFR is just a relic that should be consigned to the back of the garage and only taken out on special occasions? Is not a real modern day all-rounder? If you can forego the tech of modern bikes and all the glitz and the glamour and the outright speed and performance, then the VFR still has a place. It's still actually a really good road bike, and they're exceptional value for money too. So that just about wraps it up, but just one thing, if you've liked the video, please remember give it a like, and please subscribe. That would be really appreciated if you do. And until the next time, this has been Alan at Blue Yonder Moto. Speak to you again soon. Bye for now.